Stand up.
Hello, my friends. Happy Monday. Thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Stand Up. My guests today, two of them, Professor Eric Segall of Georgia State University and Bill B. of Washington, D.C. He's a parking garage owner and one of our favorites. Both of those guys join me on today's show, starting with Segall at 27 minutes, and my conversation with Boyle begins at 52 minutes, and I covered a lot of ground with both of them on today's show. I think you're really going to like them. I hope that you had a great weekend. I've got your headlines and sound that I found coming up, and I hope that you enjoyed the ending of the Olympics. Did you watch the closing ceremonies? Did you watch Tom Cruise rappel down and pass the flag on, apparently, to the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, who was there for the 2028 Olympics? Did you watch the men's and women's basketball team win and the women's soccer team win the gold medal? There was a lot of fun stuff in the final weekend of the Olympic Games. I hope that you took some joy out of that. And as we move on to the end of summer, the beginning of the school year for some of you, and lots to talk about in our headlines today. So let's get to it. And I can't do it without you. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. I'm here for you every day. Spread the word. Tell your friends. The best news recap, the best analysts and guests you're going to find on any daily podcast out there. And just a few headlines from the weekend. Ukrainian and Russian troops are gearing up for a showdown in western Russia. I talked more about that with Bill B. in D.C. The Trump campaign says its emails were hacked and suggests Iran may be to blame. Who knows? Also a conversation I talked about with Bill. The disgraced former president got even more disgraced when he falsely claimed in a series of social media posts yesterday that nobody attended Vice President Kamala Harris's Michigan rally last week and said that Kamala Harris should be, quote, disqualified over a fake crowd picture. The former president appeared to have fallen for a far-right conspiracy theory, one easily disproved by photos and videos captured by attendees and media showing the thousands of supporters at the event at an airport hangar in Detroit. An image of J.D. Vance allegedly dressed as a woman and wearing a blonde wig was posted on Twitter on Sunday. The unconfirmed image quickly picked up steam and began trending under the hashtag Sofa Lauren, a reference to the iconic Italian actress Sophia Loren and false claims that the Republican senator had sex with a couch. Spokesperson for the Republican Vice President J.D. Vance did not deny the photo's authenticity when approached by the Daily Beast and did not offer any further comment. So that's a thing that's happening. President Biden sat down with CBS's Robert Costa and warned that Donald Trump is a genuine danger to American security during his CBS interview. And of course, finally, Donald Trump told a story at his Mar-a-Lago press conference over the weekend about being in a helicopter with Willie Brown, the former Speaker of California State Assembly, which had to make an emergency landing in this helicopter. Well, nearly all of the details of the story were wrong. And so he's pretty much had the worst week that he's ever had. An Israeli airstrike hit a school compound in northern Gaza where displaced Palestinians were sheltering, killing dozens of people, according to Gazan officials. The Israeli military said, of course, Hamas was using the facility. New Israeli intelligence is saying that Iran is preparing to attack Israel within days. Horrible plane crash in Brazil where 61 people were killed. You probably saw that over the weekend. I don't want to say much more about it, but it was pretty horrific. Connecticut, Minnesota, Vermont, and Wisconsin will hold their congressional primaries this week on Tuesday. So those are your headlines. Let's get to the sound that I found, which is pretty good from the weekend, of course. First, let's get all these J.D. Vance clips out of the way. He sat down, I believe, with Margaret Brennan of CBS, John Carl of ABC, and Dana Bash of CNN. So he's making the rounds this weekend, answering all kinds of questions and having to answer for the disgraced former president that he signed up with so he could disgrace his family name, which, of course, isn't even his actual name. Anyway, here he is, J.D. Vance with Dana Bash. She asked him the obvious question because the Trump campaign is attacking Tim Walz's service. Of course, he served 24 years in the National Guard. J.D. Vance served 4 years in the Marines, and Donald Trump avoided service because he lied and said that he had bone spurs.
Question. Donald Trump didn't serve in the military. He received a medical draft deferment for bone spurs to avoid serving in the Vietnam War, reportedly as a favor to his father. Do you find that shameful, too?
I think that Donald Trump didn't serve in the military, but he didn't lie about it, Dana. I've known Donald Trump for a long time. He really honors our veterans. He honors me for my service. Donald Trump didn't lie about serving in the military. He didn't say that he went to Vietnam when he didn't. This is the problem. I don't criticize anybody. Whether they served our country or not, I think it's honorable to serve, but obviously a lot of people have reasons for not serving. I criticize somebody for embellishing their record, for lying, saying, I went to war. Dana, do you think that it's a problem that he said, I went to war, but he didn't actually? That seems to be a problem to me.
Well, they've corrected that. Let's move on to...
They've corrected it by admitting that he lied.
Let's move on to another...
All right, now here's another question from Dana Bash to J.D. Vance about some interviews being done of Pennsylvania voters, and she asks J.D. Vance to respond to this. I thought this was pretty good. I mean, by Dana Bash, not by J.D. Vance, obviously. There's no way to answer this, but he tries.
Is doing a project talking to voters all over swing states. He talked to Republican voters in the critical swing state, must-win, I would say, swing state of Pennsylvania.
Of course.
One of them, Carol Carty, said she was almost a childless dog lady because she didn't happen to meet the right person until she was 40 years old. Another, Joan London, was offended that you don't think she has a stake in the future of the country because she doesn't have children. What do you say to key voters like that, Republicans, swing voters?
Sure.
Who are put off by your views?
Well, what I would say, Dana, is if you look at what I said in context, the Harris campaign has frankly lied about what I actually said. I'm pro-family. I want us to have more families, and obviously sometimes it doesn't work out, sometimes for medical reasons, sometimes because you don't meet the right person. But the point is that our country has become anti-family in its public policy. Let me just give you an example of this. So after our second child was born, my wife and I, we have 3 little kids. After our second child was born, we get the baby home from the hospital. We get this ridiculous out-of-network medical bill that is financially shocking, and we're pretty well off. And that happened because we have ridiculous laws in this country that are anti-family. I've sponsored legislation to try to fix things like that so moms and dads don't get these surprise medical bills. I think it's important for us to be pro-family. That's all that I've ever said.
If you want to be pro-family, I want to, because you do criticize, as you just did, the Democratic Party for being anti-family.
I do.
You called out Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg in particular. Kamala Harris has 2 stepchildren. Pete Buttigieg and his husband have adopted twins. Do you recognize them as parents and more broadly as being part of families?
Well, of course I do, Dana. I mean, you know my life story. I was actually raised. I was raised, but Dana, I was raised. I mean, one of the first people that I gave a hug to after my RNC convention speech was my stepmom, who's been an incredibly important person in my life.
So she's not childless.
My kids call her Mamaw. Of course she's not childless, but again,
you called her that.
The criticism, I certainly did not call my own stepmother childless.
Kamala Harris.
I criticized Kamala Harris for being part of a set of ideas that exists in American leadership that is anti-family. I never, Dana, criticize people for not having kids. I criticize people for being anti-child. And I do think that Kamala Harris has made some bizarre statements. She has said things like it's reasonable not to have children over climate change. I think it's the exact opposite message we should be sending to our young families. I want to expand the child tax credit. I want to stop those surprise medical bills. I want to make housing more affordable so that if you have a young family, you can actually afford to put them in a home. And I think that it is unfortunate that so much of our public leadership has become anti-family.
All right, well, there's a lot to say about that, but the idea that Republicans, much less J.D. Vance, want to pass government policy that is pro-family is ridiculous. And he just said he wants to extend the child tax credit, but Republicans just voted against it. Would have been a perfect opportunity for Dana Bash to ask about that, but anybody can criticize anybody else's interviews. That's easy to do. Nonetheless, this idea that he wants to create a more affordable out-of-network health policy, well, that's something that Democrats have been trying to do forever, and Republicans are against it. And he wants to make housing more affordable. The guy's a venture capitalist. Venture capitalists are destroying the housing market by buying it all up. This private equity buying up housing. I mean, it's every industry that private equity has been buying up. These pro-capitalist policies of J.D. Vance and Republicans are destroying the American family more than anything else. It is a preposterous notion to think that Republicans are pro-family, at least when it comes to government public policy. Absolutely insane. They are far more likely to roll back policies that help families and tell you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and stop making excuses and being lazy and living off the teat of the government. It's just insane that anybody could possibly think that they're pro-family with their policies. It's bullshit, religious, libertarian policy that just does not meet the test. Okay, so moving on. Here is Pete Buttigieg answering some of the things that J.D. Vance was saying.
Here you heard me ask J.D. Vance about his attacks on Tim Walz's military record. I want to replay part of what he said about that.
I'm not criticizing Tim Walz's service. I'm criticizing the fact that he lied about his service for political gain, Dana. Now, I served in the United States Marine Corps, and you know this. And look, there are a lot of things that I'm proud about. I've never lied about what I did or overstated it because it would be beneficial to me in an election. I think that's what Tim Walz did. That's what I was criticizing. And yes, I do think it's scandalous behavior.
Now, the Harris campaign says Walz misspoke when he said he carried weapons of war. You heard me mention that to the senator. You served in the military. You deployed to Afghanistan. Does Senator Vance have a point when he said that we should hear more from Governor Walz himself or even Vice President Harris to correct the record there?
No, he doesn't. And the fact that a veteran wants to go out and disparage another veteran just goes against certainly everything I learned during my time in service. Look, I think in many ways it's the exception that proves the rule. If the only thing that they can find about Tim Walz to complain about is to disparage his military record that was clearly honorable. Remember, you can retire at 20 years. Tim Walz served for 24. And the fact that they have to go back to find a clip from 2018 to find the one time that he slipped up when he talks about the weapons of war that he carried and said something instead about carrying a weapon in war, it's kind of an exception that proves the rule in terms of how hard you have to look to find Tim Walz saying anything that isn't precise and accurate. But there's something, I think, much bigger at play here, which is I watched that interview and watched J.D. Vance present himself as suddenly very particular about precision in speech and very concerned about honesty. He's running with Donald Trump, somebody who has set records for lying in public life. He just gave a press conference where fact checkers estimate that he told 162 distortions or lies. That, frankly, is just impressive in terms of being able to physically do that. It's like the Olympics of lying. So maybe just because it's Sunday morning, I can't stop thinking about the scripture that says, how can you look at your brother and say, let me take the speck out of your eye when you have a plank in your own eye?
God damn, that guy is good at arguing and debating and making Republicans look like real hypocritical silly gooses. Speaking of which, I just have to go back to J.D. Vance, who was with John Carl on ABC News, who asked him another really important and obvious question, because, of course, J.D. Vance is married to a woman, an Indian-American brown woman, his wife, Usha. And listen to what he says about how Donald Trump talks to his wife. It's creepy anyway. It's a weird thing to admit. He always talks about how beautiful she is. Well, stop. Maybe he should stop saying that. It's wildly inappropriate. And the fact that Jonathan Carl doesn't push back on that alone is kind of weird.
So there's been a lot of talk about racism and whatnot. You faced some really nasty stuff. I saw this thing that Nick Fuentes, of course, he's an avowed white supremacist. He said, what kind of a man marries somebody named Usha? Clearly he doesn't value his racial identity, his heritage. I mean, this is racist garbage.
Yes, it is.
But this is also a guy that dined with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago during this campaign.
Well, and Donald Trump doesn't know anything about and frankly doesn't care for. But yeah, look, my attitude to these people attacking my wife is she's beautiful, she's smart. What kind of man marries Usha? A very smart man and a very lucky man, importantly. And my view is, look, if these guys want to attack me or attack my views, my policy views, my personality, come after me. But don't attack my wife. She's out of your league.
But, I mean, that dinner that Trump had, and of course it was Kanye West, the guy that's praised Hitler, who arranged it all, that was back a year and a half ago, and Trump still hasn't given a full-throated denouncement of this guy who said that terrible stuff, but he said, I mean, he's a white supremacist.
Look, I think President Trump has issued plenty of condemnations on this. The one thing that the one thing I like about Donald Trump, John, is that he actually will talk to anybody, but just because you talk to somebody doesn't mean you endorse their views. And look, I mean, Donald Trump spent a lot of quality time with my wife. Every time he sees her, he gives her a hug, tells her she's beautiful, and jokes around with her a little bit. I'm not at all worried about Donald Trump. I'm worried sometimes about these ridiculous attacks. But again, this is what you sign up for when you come into politics. I wish people would keep it focused on me, but whatever. They're going to say what they're going to say. My wife's tough enough to handle it, and that's a good thing.
All right, well, yeah, she's tough enough to handle it. That's a good thing. But should she have to? I mean, you signed up with the most disgusting, horrible man in the world. And of course, your wife is going to be treated that way by all of his cult followers and fans and white supremacists that support him. And there's one more clip I've got to play for you because this is just how low J.D. Vance will go, is to lie for Donald Trump's lies. It's just unbearable, but also real important for folks, I think, to hear. And so the final clip of J.D. Vance, this one, again, ABC's John Carl with the question.
And finally, before you go, we commit to this race to kind of sticking to the facts. I mean, I heard Donald Trump give this speech in Montana he just gave, and he said that Tim Walz has signed a letter letting the state kidnap children to change their gender, that allowing pedophiles to claim, to be exempt from crimes. I mean, this is not true. It's not remotely true.
Well, what President Trump said, and I haven't watched the whole rally.
What he said was not true.
What President Trump said, John, is that Tim Walz has supported taking children from their parents if the parents don't consent to gender reassignment. That is crazy. And by the way, Tim Walz gets on his high horse about mind your own damn business. One way of minding your own damn business, John, is to not try to take my children away from me if I have different moral views than you. He has not signed a law allowing the state to kidnap children to change their sexual identity. What I just explained to you, I would describe as kidnapping, John. He has absolutely done this stuff. It's not crazy, John. Come on.
It's not what
you should not be able to take people's children away from them.
And that's not what he's proposed.
If you disagree with decisions about gender reassignment, yes, he has proposed that, John. He absolutely has. Now, here's the more important thing, John. Why are we talking about inflation? Why are we talking about the fact that groceries are unaffordable thanks to Kamala Harris's policies, and so is housing? We've talked a little bit about the border. Why are we talking about the fact that the entire world is on fire because Kamala Harris's foreign policy, she's just asleep at the wheel? We have a set of plans. You talk about sticking to the facts. Donald Trump and I have a set of plans to lower the cost of housing and food, to bring peace back to the world with American leadership. That is all that we want to do. And I think it's telling that the Harris administration is focused so much on these side issues instead of on the real substance, why Americans are unhappy with Kamala Harris's leadership.
To be clear, I just asked you about something that Donald Trump brought up, not something that the Harris campaign brought up. I was asking you about Donald Trump's words.
I'm saying
thank you.
But John, the Harris campaign, what are their policy views? They don't have a policy position on their website. Should she sit down and answer tough questions with you?
Yes,
I think she should.
Absolutely.
Where is she?
Well,
but we respect the American people enough.
We hope she'll be on the show soon.
I hope so too, John, because the person who wants to be our president ought to sit down for some tough interviews. I'm willing to do it, and I wish she would too.
All right. Well, soon she will, and then they're going to lose that talking point. And let's go to Uncle Jesse, the former governor of Minnesota. My old friend Jesse Ventura is making the rounds as well. He was on with CNN's Laura Coates. And, well, listen to this on MSNBC with Reverend Al Sharpton over the weekend.
I have to ask you, is the Trump of today the same man you once befriended? And how do you think this election will play out?
I will answer that with no. He is not the guy that came to me back in '98 after I won. Back then, he was much more liberal, but you need to understand, Donald Trump is for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is going to do whatever it is that supports Donald Trump. So he looked the situation over. He obviously saw that he could take over the Republican Party. So he changed his views. You know, he went from pro-choice now to, no rights for women's reproductive. He's gone far right. He's trying to say he's now a religious person. Well, to me, if you're going to be a religious person, you have to live it. And Donald Trump hardly lives it. I mean, he's had multiple wives. I often laugh and think, what would the Republicans have said if Barack Obama would have had multiple wives and multiple children and ran for president like Donald Trump? What would the Republican response be to that? It would have been horrifying to see what Republicans would have said if that would have been Barack Obama. And yet they'll embrace a Donald Trump. Reverend, I'm an agnostic atheist, and I think that I'm more religious than he is.
Wow, that's quite a statement.
Reverend Al Sharpton talking to Jesse Ventura. I didn't have that plan to hear, but what a hilarious match of two people. And here's one more clip I want to share from MSNBC. This is Mitch Landrieu, the former mayor of New Orleans and a surrogate for the Biden administration, on with MSNBC's Jonathan Capehart yesterday.
That'll be the biggest platform she'll have to talk to the American people. The next biggest platform she'll have is on September 10th when she and Donald Trump meet in a debate. Now, Trump has said he's agreed to a debate on Fox on September 3rd, and then there's another one possibly set for September 25th. Any chance Vice President Harris will meet up with Donald Trump at either of those venues, in addition to the one she's already agreed to?
Donald John Trump is a confused human being. He's having a hard time figuring out what day he is. He's so cray-cray right now about her crowds. So they have agreed to a debate on September 10th. I'm sure the vice president will be open to other debates, but she's not even sure that he's going to show up on September 10th. So that's going to be the day. That's the one that everybody has agreed on. My best guess is there'll be debates after that. JD today said he can't wait to debate Tim Walz. I can't wait for that debate either. If he wants to make this race about character so that we can ask about the character of Donald Trump and the character of our team, we're happy to have that debate every day.
All right, there you go, Mitch Landrieu on MSNBC. And finally, your old pal, Pete. That's me. I was on CNN on Friday night on a really interesting panel with a couple of great topics. Audie Cornish was in for Abby Phillip and had me on to talk about a couple of things, including asking me about Joe Rogan's seemingly endorsement of RFK Jr. Here's a little bit of that.
And the only one who's not doing that is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
You a fan?
Yeah, I am a fan. Yeah, he's the only one that makes sense to me.
Joe Rogan now getting the MAGA experience after those comments on his podcast praising presidential candidate RFK Jr. Now, in response to the backlash, Rogan tried to clarify. He says everyone's got the wrong idea. He wasn't offering an official endorsement to Kennedy. And while Rogan heaped praise on Donald Trump for surviving an assassination attempt, he also added this caveat, quote, "I'm not the guy to get political information from." Joining our fifth seat tonight, comedian Pete Dominick, host of the daily stand-up podcast. Pete, you have been to Rogan's show, which, in fact, people get their political information from, like a lot.
Yeah, too many people, mostly young men.
And I say this, you went on the show to talk about what?
Well, to argue with him. Joe and I are old friends.
Yeah.
I mean, I've known Joe. I came up with him as a stand-up comedian, and so he had me on as a guest of his show in November 19, which will remind you just a few months before.
The before times.
Before times, exactly. So things were a little bit normal on his show and in the world, but COVID really seemed to change Joe and his opinions about everything. He went from, trusted scientists to conspiracy theorists and then all of the rest. So a lot has changed in his world.
Well, you were talking about gun policy at one point, and I bring this up because for him to sort of say, hey, look, we don't talk about, I'm not the guy, feels like vaguely disingenuous. And a lot of comedians who literally do satire sitting behind desks kind of, when the time comes, back away from saying, don't get your news from me.
Yeah, I mean, I worked at The Daily Show, Jon Stewart, The Colbert Report.
I didn't say a name. Don't get me in trouble.
I'm dropping names. But all these guys have always done that. And the bottom line is, I was one of the original comedians to host a talk show. I'm very jealous of Rogan and all these other guys' success because they really blew up. But the bottom line is you can be a really smart comedians are great because we're curious. We ask good questions. But the strength of your show and your credibility often comes in your guests and people that you platform. And if you're having conspiracy theorists and white supremacists and others on your show, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. If you invite them on your show to say these things, then you have to stand by them and you cannot play dumb. And I never have and I never would.
All right, that was me on CNN and now it's me back on the podcast. But I wanted to play the other half of that clip or of that segment where she asked me about kind of the Venn diagram between, well, here it is.
Going to react.
Can we talk about that? I don't know. Some people might think that Venn diagram is a circle between a Joe Rogan fan and a Trump fan. That's not necessarily...
Not a total, but there's some overlap.
Yeah. So what's your sense of it?
Well, I mean, you can see the statistics and the demographics and who listens to certain podcasts. And overwhelmingly, it is young men. And they love fighting. A huge thing that Joe Rogan hosts and has always been a part of is MMA. And so they like that kind of a thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're Trump fans. As a matter of fact, Joe Rogan said, go out and listen to this well-known comedian who's a libertarian. That's who he suggested you get your political news from. But the idea that there's a huge overlap, I think, is true. I mean, it's absolutely true, but I think they get
Scott, you're making an interesting point about
Then she cuts me up there and goes back to Scott Jennings. She does a great job, by the way, but I actually make a better point I thought of and came back to because I think this is the best and most important point that I made during the conversation on CNN on Friday night.
And when you have RFK on the ballot, I think it poses
the overlap, I just figured out, the answer to your question, the overlap, the Venn diagram, is conspiracy theories. RFK is known mainly for one thing. He's only famous for one big reason nationwide. That is to be an anti-vax person. He's anti-science. He's a conspiracy theorist. So is Joe Rogan, and so is Donald Trump. They all are anti-vax.
Particularly on the COVID issue, though, just to be clear for
furthermore,
Rogan.
no. I mean, we can split all those hairs using journalism and research to see which vaccines.
You talked about that being a catalyst for him, the pandemic, and that happened a lot for a lot of people.
Rogan, RFK, and Donald Trump. The anti-vaxxer has three choices. They like all those three guys.
But so to see them at odds with each other is actually kind of weird.
And kind of good because reasonable, critical thinking people have to then go back to people like Dr. Peter Hotez and so many other people who are heroes because they have created miraculous vaccines that have helped save the lives of children in poverty all over the world that people like, unfortunately, Rogan, RFK, and Donald Trump have destroyed their lives and careers and put them in danger.
Okay.
All right, I'm glad that got back to both Peter Hotez and Michael Mann, who said nice things and thanked me on Twitter, and that made me feel good. And thanks to everybody who watched that on Friday night on CNN. I got a nice email from Rory Sadoff, who said, nice job on CNN, Pete. Good input. Nice in and out with your comments. Didn't overdo it and flood the zone, but you made relevant points. You belong on that stage as much as anyone. You helped stir the conversation. Well done. Rory, thank you for picking up on all of it. I really appreciate it. And that is all I've got for you here on the news segment. Now it's time to get to my conversations. Coming up, Bill Boyle, a great conversation with him about politics, about Ukraine, about media, and more. And first, though, I've got the great Professor Eric Segall, the Legal Eagle, joining me right now. Of course, Georgia State constitutional law professor, one of the best, one of the most credible sources in all of con law, one of the most respected now, I think it's fair to say as well. He is the author of Supreme Myths and Originalism as Faith, two great books, and the host of the Supreme Myths podcast. You can read him at Dorf on Law. He's been published in all the major law journals and media outlets that he's written for. And right now, we've got him. Lots to catch up with Eric Segall on. He's just had his 5th shoulder surgery, so I started by asking him about that. One of my closest friends. I love this man, and I always love our conversations. Always so fascinating. Let's do it right now with the Legal Eagle. All right, I've got him back now. We're recording on Sunday night, just post-shoulder surgery. It's great to see you in the sling, and hopefully this is a good thing. How are you feeling?
Thank you, my friend. I have a new shoulder, so at 66, getting new things is good. It's been a little bit of a go of it, but I'm getting there. Thanks.
Yeah, and what would you say to anybody who gets prescribed?
I'm going to tell the world what a medical professional said to me.
Go ahead.
Okay? This is for everybody listening, and this is my 5th shoulder surgery. So I have had numerous encounters with how to deal with the pain of shoulder surgery, and I've tried it different ways. It turns out that in America today, marijuana is legal in every state. Weed, as the kids call it, weed is legal in every single state in the country. It doesn't matter about state law. The kind of weed that's legal is gummies that have less than 0.3% THC and then a bunch of other stuff. These THC gummies that are legal, no one can put you in jail for it. No state, no town, nobody, are really powerful. So the first thing I want to say to people is if you like weed, go get these gummies. They're legal. They're not illegal. It doesn't matter in New York or California where weed is legal. But in places like Georgia and South Carolina, it's not legal. But it is under federal law. Second thing, this medical personnel said to me, I would rather you be stoned on weed for a week than take more than a couple of opioids. And I'm here to vouch for that. I have done it the opioid way. I have done it this way, in combination. In combination this is all legal. Everything I've done is legal. Is really much better, folks. I've been in both directions. Stay off the opioids. Use the weed.
There you go. PSA to open, and that may come in very handy for a lot of people, and hopefully that works. I'm glad that you're feeling better.
By the way, one more thing, Pete. Steve Kerr, the coach of the Golden State Warriors, who just won the Olympic gold medal and is a nine-time NBA champion, did a press conference after his back surgery 3 years ago. Not about the Golden State Warriors, not about Steph Curry, not about his championships. He had a whole specialized press conference to simply tell the world, I just had terrible back surgery. It was incredibly painful. I took opioids. Never do that again. Use marijuana. Do not take opioids. They will destroy your life. He said that publicly for no reason. Like, he wasn't asked. He just came out and said, I understand. So the doctor who told me this, I think, is exactly right, and I can't stress it enough.
Well, I'm going to go see if I can find that Steve Kerr audio. Yeah. Let me ask you real quick, because you live in Georgia. You are a professor at Georgia State University, where it's gotten a lot of attention with both Kamala Harris and the disgraced former president having rallies at your school. But
yeah, that was something.
There's some conversation now that about the future of the state of Georgia. You've got the Trump savaging the Republican governor, Brian Kemp. The Republican Secretary of State is voting for Kamala Harris, is my understanding. Anyway, we've heard a lot about Georgia. Obviously, the two Senate runoffs, Stacey Abrams, Black women saving Georgia, and so on. And I do like to check in with folks like you who live there and listeners and other strategists about the future of your state in this upcoming election, because people are being very critical of Trump. Why is he savaging the Republican governor? Or I just read another headline today, something about he's, self-destructing in front of Georgia voters. What's going on there?
It was weird. It was weird, but as the vice president-elect says, they're all weird, and it's always weird. But so here is this. I believe this to be Trump's and his cronies' strategy. And by the way, this has to come from Project 2025. I don't know that for a fact, but this is much too sophisticated for Trump to have any hand in it whatsoever. Their plan is to cause enough disruption and chaos when the Electoral College votes are counted so that they can't be counted. And if they can't be counted, or if no person gets a majority, 270 Electoral College votes, if all of that happens, the Constitution is crystal clear. It goes to the House of Representatives. They vote by state, and the Democrats will lose. There's no way Democrats gain 4 states or 5 states in the House. Even if we get more people, we won't have more states. So what they're going to do is, in Georgia, they have replaced reasonable people on the election board that controls the certification of the votes in Georgia with Trump supporters and election deniers. If they were to do tomfoolery, if they were to steal votes, not count the votes, whatever, there will be court cases. But that'll be hard to prove. It's one thing to defend against allegations of voter fraud that aren't substantiated. Right. That's easy to do. It's much harder when the Georgia election officials say, sorry, nobody won. There were too many broken ballots, or too many this or that, hanging chads, whatever you want to call them. And if they do that in enough states, then nobody can get to 270. I don't think they're planning on Trump getting to 270. They're planning, this has happened at least twice before in American history, maybe more. This is how Thomas Jefferson got to be president. This is how 1876 Reconstruction died, and we got a new president. You go into a back room and you make a deal. That's a problem in this country right now. So this is what I tweeted today, and the tweet got enormous response from a lot of people, including, well, some weird people who responded to it, some really deep conservatives and a bunch of Democrats who said, we're working on it. We have strategies. Mark Elias is working on this. I'm glad. If it ends up in the Supreme Court, it could be Bush versus Gore too.
What was your tweet exactly? Do you know? I'm looking it up.
I am a little bit drugged and a lot in pain, but that's how it started.
It says, listen, I'm a little drugged and in a lot of pain, but I'm confident the Trump forces are planning as a first strategy getting this election to the House of Representatives. That's the plan, not to win. And what's happening in Georgia and other places is a key part. Democrats need a plan. Yeah, that did get a lot of views. Go ahead. You already explained.
In this case, the tie doesn't go to the runner. The tie goes to Trump. And that's a real problem. Like, that's a serious issue in America today. A lot of people are working on it. But, Pete, I think what I just have to say to your audience, who I think those who've been with us for a while trust me on this, what I'm saying is this. No one knows what's going to happen. It could be a landslide like we've never seen before. That honestly wouldn't surprise me the way this is going. But there is more than a minimal chance of 1800, 1876, 2000 all happening again. And if that happens, we have the left, the Democrats, have a serious problem. We lose in the Supreme Court and we lose in the House of Representatives. Yeah. So I'm not trying to be Mr. Doom and Gloom here, Tina. I'm really not. This is a serious enough problem where moneyed Democrat interests are taking it very seriously. We have to take it seriously.
Well, here's step by step. Basically, number one, position Republican election deniers on election boards across the country.
That's Georgia. They've done that in Georgia.
And especially in swing states. Number two, county election boards refuse to certify votes in elections where their chosen candidate loses. So states' results can't be certified. You said that. Yep. Number three, you said this too. No candidate receives 270 electoral votes. So responsibility for deciding goes to the Republican-led House. That's key. In the House, each state's delegation gets one vote, and a simple majority is all needed to win. Despite, number five, losing both the Electoral College and the popular vote, Trump is installed as president. That's what you're saying.
You know what's really weird about that? Sorry, I'm going to make light of it just for a second. You know what's really weird about that? As I read the Constitution, it's never been tried, I don't think. If that happens, you know how the vice president is decided? It's not J.D. Vance. The vice president gets chosen by the Senate. And that is a majority vote. It appears. That's what the Constitution says. Now, that's a weird thing, right? To have but that's how the country started. The person who got the second most votes was vice president. There wasn't the president picking anybody or the parties picking anybody. But as it reads, if anyone in the audience thinks I'm wrong about this, please write me and tell me. But I'm not an expert on this. But as I read it, the Senate picks the vice president. And I think, don't the Democrats have half the states? And then Kamala gets the deciding vote. So it's really weird. Anyway, the Trump thing is dangerous. That thing you just read is exactly accurate. And I'm really terrified about it. And the reason I'm saying that publicly is everybody should be terrified. We can meet this challenge. I think we can beat it back. But it's going to have to be done expensively at the very top levels. And we certainly have to assume, this is the key thing, Pete, we can't go to court. That's the thing. We can't. Courts won't rule for us this time. They did last time in 2000.
Well, let me put it just real.
2020. Excuse me, 2020.
The Supreme Court won't rule for us.
But anything going in the lower courts that matters will go to the Supreme Court.
Right. So that's why you have to win huge, because if it were just two states or, God forbid, one state, then the Supreme Court would have an easier time with that. But if we win overwhelmingly in 5 to 7 states, then it's less likely.
There's actually a bigger problem than that, Pete, I think. Sorry to the audience for the Sunday night downer. Hey, I want the audience to know something. I wanted to talk about Steph Curry, and Pete wouldn't let me.
I don't want to talk about basketball, but yeah.
If Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, and states like that, states with very blue population, city centers, Philadelphia, Detroit, Atlanta. If tomfoolery and cheating happens in those states, like in Georgia, for example, Atlanta would burn to the ground. Like, we're going to have riots like we've never seen. That's a Trump phrase, but it's true. Atlanta, by the way, has never burned to the ground. Atlanta was not lit on fire in the 60s. The only major city in the country that wasn't. This would cause Atlanta to burn. Because if they cheat, it means the white people are cheating the black people. That's what it means. Let's be honest here. It means the black vote in Fulton County wasn't counted correctly. In Philadelphia and wherever, in Detroit. So that's a real threat. And I'm really worried about that, mostly because I live 2 miles from there. But I am somewhat worried about that for the country. So we have to win big. The answer here is win big. That's the answer.
Right now, I'm glad that's the message you're sending, and I think that's the message we should all be sending. Feel good.
Yes. Be positive. Yes. I'm being positive here. I love this ticket. I think they're great. And I think we're going to win.
I haven't talked to you since this ticket was finalized. Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, you've been paying close attention. I'm happy to get your take on what you're seeing right now playing out, this reversal of fortunes.
Well, I could make traditional liberal pro-defendant type arguments against the president-elect to be, I hope. I can make other arguments about her, but it doesn't matter. the choice of Donald Trump and what's his face,
Tim
and
Walz.
these two.
Oh, J.D.
It's
Vance.
not a choice. We could have somebody 10 times worse than both Kamala and Walz, and it would still be 100 times better than Trump. So it doesn't matter. Pete, I think I hate to say this, and I hope your audience doesn't get mad. I think I'd be saying the same thing about Mitt Romney. I would be saying he has to win, and we'll worry about abortion later. Like, we'll worry about judges later. Like, we have to beat Trump. And this ticket is infinitely superior and infinitely better.
All right. What does it mean if they get elected in terms of how you see the potential changes when it comes?
It depends. So I think I've talked on your podcast before, Pete, because of my involvement in the Section 3 14th Amendment controversy with the guy who actually wrote that big article and various things I did. I got to hear very sophisticated arguments. I'm not an expert in this, on cults and political movements and social movements. If Trumpism in America is a cult, cutting off its head will end it.
Yeah.
If it is a political movement, it'll make it stronger. If it is a hybrid of the two, I think all bets are off and nobody knows. My position is Trumpism in America today is about 60% cult, 40% movement. That 40% is powerful. So I don't know what's going to happen with the people, how mad they'll be, how their reaction will be. America had serious problems before Donald Trump. You and I had how many years of fantastic conversations about our country's problems? Not to mention climate change, which is going to kill all of us anyway. So, but we have to get rid of this man. The first thing is to get rid of this man and then see. When I say get rid of, let me be clear. Get him out of politics. Make him no longer able to hold public office in this country. That needs to be done immediately. Just does.
Do you think he's likely to have his cases move forward if he loses the cases against him? And I don't know how much you've paid attention to Judge Tanya Chutkan's case, the federal case, January 6th, but she seems to be moving again. Do you think those are likely to be continued if he doesn't win the classified documents case?
Anybody who answers that question without saying, I really don't know. It depends on a lot of contingencies that we don't know about today. Is giving you the wrong answer. That's the right answer. Yeah. Sorry. I can't even. I am happy to predict who's going to win the NBA playoffs next year. I will predict that Harris is going to be Trump, but predicting that scenario is very difficult.
Right. What do you make?
Is that a fair answer, Pete? Is that fair? I mean, I don't.
No, I don't know. You have a much better idea of it than
I think your show knows I'm very opinionated, but I'm not going to give it on that because I just don't know.
So what do you make of the more news coming out that there's even more corruption at the Supreme Court, specifically with Clarence Thomas? We've learned
Could there be more, really? What's more? We have a guy who funded his mother's house, his wife's livelihood, and his kids' education. That all happened years ago. What difference does it make? What if he gave him $10 million directly? Who cares? He paid for his wife's job, his mother's house, and his kids' education. No judge takes that money. It's crazy. That's insane. We're in La Land. Pete, it's insane. I was business before the court.
Well, what do you make of the last-minute announcements of President Biden about Supreme Court reform? We haven't talked since those were announced. Yeah. Kamala Harris would probably carry them out.
I'm in favor of every single reform mentioned. I articulated them in my book in 2012, every one of them. I think that nothing can happen until the Democrats have solid majorities in both houses and a Democrat president. And I'm not, frankly, okay, I'll give you my honest answer. It's really, really good that the president of the United States said we need Supreme Court reform.
Yeah.
Someday I will be making arguments, or other people will be making arguments. Even the president of the United States realized this institution is dumb, stupid, dangerous, anti-democratic, and like no other in world history, all of which is true. But that's going to have to wait now. That just has to wait. We do anything and everything we can to beat Trump. And what I don't know, abortion helps Democrats. I'm on board on that. I've been proven right on that issue. I don't know if Supreme Court reform helps Democrats. I'm guessing that's more neutral.
Fair
so
enough.
even Segall, the guy who says the court is not a court, says, I don't care right now. Right now, we beat Trump. then we talk about it.
Love it. Like that you keep coming back to that. Got to ask you about the appeals court that upheld Maryland's assault weapon ban and what you think of that and where that's going to go.
I don't know. Let's close our. This is a sophisticated legal test that the very smartest law professors in history use, and we can all do it together. Let's all close our eyes. Imagine the New York Times and think about a headline. Supreme Court strikes down ban on lethal assault weapons, or whatever you want to call them. Can we picture that headline? And my answer is yes. 5 years ago, my answer was no. Today, my answer is yes. Now I can picture that headline. So that's the best test I have for you, Pete. So yes, I think the court will reverse it. I think they will say, as they've already said, that weapons in common use are protected, which, by the way, is exactly the opposite of the original meaning of the Second Amendment, which was about military weapons. It says militia. It says fucking militia. Scalia said in Heller, the test is this a weapon of common use? Why would that be the test in a provision that talks about the military? It's the most bizarre thing. But in any event, assault weapons are, by any definition, in common use. If that's the test, Americans have a right to them. And that's the dumbest thing I've ever said on this show, probably. Like, it's just, and what I'm saying, by the way, Pete, is a move on this. I am seeing the right, moderates on the right. And in fact, Elon Musk did this. Not moderates, but Elon Musk did this today. He said, first they take your guns, then they take your speech, pointing to England. Some crazy person in England talked about arresting Americans or something. I didn't read the story.
Right.
But they're comparing the First and Second Amendments now much more closely. And like, democracies need speech. Democracies need guns. No, that's a lie. Most of the world's democracies don't have gun rights. All of them have speech rights.
Can't argue with it.
I know. It's insane. So my answer to your question is, I'm afraid the court is going to strike down the ban on assault weapons.
Right. That's what I thought you would end with.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one more thing. You sent this New York Times column to me today by David French, who is a conservative. And
actually, funny Twitter story about that. He blocked me years ago. Today, his wife followed me.
Oh, interesting.
He hasn't blocked me now. He hasn't blocked me now. But he did block me once.
Well, he writes in this column, I believe life begins at conception. If I lived in Florida, I would support the state's heartbeat bill and vote against the referendum seeking to liberalize Florida's abortion laws. I supported the Dobbs decision, and I support well-drafted abortion restrictions at the state and federal levels. I was a pro-life lawyer who worked for pro-life legal organizations. While I want prospective parents to be able to use IVF to build their families, I do not believe that unused embryos should simply be discarded, thrown away as no longer useful. But I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris in 2024, and ironically enough, I'm doing it in part to save conservatism. And he goes on to say what he means. Why were you so interested?
That wasn't what I wanted you to read. A couple of years ago, in 2000, when the Supreme Court was deciding whether to overturn Roe, not in Dobbs, but in Whole Women's Health 2 years earlier, you had me and Mike Dorff on your show. Mike Dorff is I blog with Mike. Mike clerked for Justice Kennedy during the Casey decision. Mike clerked for Justice Kennedy during the Casey decision, which Kennedy wrote a lot of. And Mike and I agree on if Mike were here, he would say he and I agree on 98% of constitutional law. One of the things we disagreed about, and you had us on for this, to debate it, my view was, in the long run, both abortion and the left would be greatly assisted by the reversal of Roe. Mike disagreed with that. We had a healthy debate about it. Pete, go on in your column, and what you were just reading, please find this, and read the paragraph where he talks about what Dobbs did to the Democrats, did to the left.
What Dobbs did to the right?
No. Okay. Find the part where he talks about the political winds changing and all that. How much of an issue abortion has been for the left. What a great issue it's been since Dobbs was reversed.
But when we're dealing with a complex social phenomenon, political and legal issues are rarely simple. For the first time in decades, abortion rates and ratios increased under Trump. In addition, the best available evidence indicates that abortion rates are up since the Dobbs decision. Barack Obama...
Wait, stop right there. I told you and Mike that. Both of you, that would happen. Go ahead.
Barack Obama was unabashedly pro-choice politician, yet there were over 300,000 fewer abortions in 2016 than there were in 2008, George W. Bush's last year in office. Though Trump nominated anti-abortion justices and enacted a number of anti-abortion policies, there were 56,080 more abortions in the last year of his term than there were in the last year of Obama's presidency. Even worse, after Dobbs, the pro-life position in a state of political collapse. It hasn't won.
Wait, hold on. The state of the pro-life position, not the legal arguments, the pro-life position is in total collapse. I said that too, Pete. I'm sorry to be like this, but I got killed by the left for decades for this view. Keep going.
It hasn't won a single red state referendum, and it might even lose again in Florida, a state that's increasingly red, yet also looks to have a possible pro-choice supermajority. According to a recent poll, 69% of Floridians support the pro-choice abortion referendum, a margin well above the 60% threshold required for passage.
One more.
If the ultimate goal of the pro-life movement is to reduce the number of abortions, not just change legal precedent, then these numbers and these electoral outcomes are deeply alarming. If present trends continue, then abortion opponents will have won an important legal battle, but they'll ultimately lose the more important cultural and political cause.
What did I say about the relationship between the legal battle and the cultural and political cause? What did I say about it, Pete? You've known me 15 years.
You said the correlation was direct.
Yes. Once the court gets out of the way, we will solve this. Now, it's not going to be 2 years. It's not going to be 3 years. There is tremendous misery in the meantime. No one who knows my work thinks I'm minimizing the horrors, the disaster, the moral evil of making women carry fetuses to term. I was taking a pragmatic view. It will never get better with Roe and Casey on the books, ever. That was my point. My point was both the Democratic Party and the pro-choice movement will, in the long run, be assisted by the overturning of Roe and Casey.
Well, sadly, you've been proven right again, my friend.
That column today was really interesting because this is as dedicated a pro-life person as you're going to find with the intellectual pedigree and the smarts. This is a smart, I despise it, actually. I don't despise him, but I find his abortion position horrific.
Right.
Just, demeaning to women and everything. But if he's saying we've lost the political cultural battles, and he's saying that just 2 years after Dobbs, that's amazing. And that's what I've been trying to say. And it's not, listen, everybody, sorry to be condescending. It's not just true for abortion. Get the court out of guns. Get the court out of affirmative action. Get the court out of everything except core speech rights, core religion rights, and the rights of criminal defendants. We need the court. I'm going to rant. We need the court to protect the rights of criminal defendants. We don't need them to solve the abortion, affirmative action, gun problems for us. Sorry.
Oh, don't apologize. Very happy to have any of your rants, and I'm going to wrap it there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's the most important thing I can say to your audience. Get the court out of our business.
You've done it again, sir. Much appreciated.
Thank you, my friend.
All right, there he goes, the legal Eric Segall. Go hit him up on Twitter at eSpin Segall. Go listen to his podcast, Supreme Myths. Get his books. Let him know that you heard him here. We always love it when he joins us, and I always love it when you thank guests for joining us. And now I've got another one. 2 guests on today's show, just like the old times. It's Bill Boyle. Bill B. in D.C. is a business owner in Washington, D.C. who's very well plugged in, very well read, and very articulate at talking about stuff. And listeners and journalists alike listen to a lot of what he has to say and like when he joins me here on the show to say it. So he's on Twitter and Blue Sky at Bill B in DC. He's not looking to make any money or get any plaudits for this analysis, which is part of the reason why people like him. His incentives are pure, and that he's just fascinated by these things and great at talking about them. So I had him on to talk about them. How about it? Bill B, always great. Love this one. We talked late last night, and here it is. Good to see you. Thank you for joining me here on a Sunday night. There's a few things I wanted to get your take on. Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing very good, and I don't understand some of the things that are happening, so I figured I'd check in with you to help explain them, because I saw your Twitter timeline. You've been tweeting a lot about these hacked emails or that the Trump campaign was hacked. And let me just put it out this way. Basically, let's go back in history. The Clinton campaign was hacked in 2016, and multiple media outlets, including the New York Times, Politico, and others, got parts of those hacks, some of those emails, and they published them. They talked about them. The Trump campaign was hacked weeks ago. We're just learning now, but we haven't really seen much of those hacks. And it seems like there's a double standard in terms of the reporting, what they had and what they reported. Do I have that anywhere remotely accurate?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is basically, and the reason that it created a reaction from Neera Tanden and other folks like me is that, it's Ben Smith kind of going like, well, we need to be careful about how we do this. And I actually agree with that.
Ben Smith, the reporter.
The reporter, yeah. He's at Semaphore, and he still writes articles at Politico, like a column at Politico. And Politico had like a minute-to-minute update of all of the hacks that happened to Hillary Clinton, literally up until 7 p.m. on election night in 2016. They went to town with it. And what's interesting about this is that Ben, he makes the point that in his article that he wrote about it today, that we have to look at every hack and go, okay, we don't want to be fulfilling the agenda of somebody else, Russia, Iran, or whoever. And so we need to be careful with all this stuff. And okay, sure. I agree with that. But at the same time, number one, we don't know it's a hack. That is unproven. This was internal campaign materials. In the case of everything in the dossier for J.D. Vance, according to Politico and the Washington Post, it's open source material in the J.D. Vance dossier that's in the material that was sent to Politico. So this is not anything that they couldn't say, okay, here's what is in material. We can go check it against reality. And that will tell us what the potential worries, issues, problems Trump may have had with J.D. Vance. This is not campaign analytics. This is not, their internal emails to each other about somebody's risotto,
recipe. Yeah.
Right? I mean, so number one, it's the Trump people saying it's a hack, kind of riding on a thing that Microsoft said. We don't really know if that's true or not. It's a reasonable supposition, but it's definitely not proven yet. Number two, it's a story in and of itself that the Trump campaign got hacked or had someone leak this, and they never went to the FBI. That seems like a pretty gigantic story to me in and of itself, that they knew a criminal act had been committed, which this is, and they didn't go to the FBI for it. That seems pretty freaking interesting to me. And that's something I would have loved to have known. And it's amazing to me that this happened, in July 22nd, right?
Apparently,
so this has been
the Trump campaign.
Weeks that they've had this, 3+ weeks that they've been sitting on it. And apparently no one thought, hey, there's a story here in the fact that they're not going to the FBI about it. You're not, by the way, acting out the will of the hacker if it turns out to be Russia or Iran or somebody by reporting that story. That's a different thing. And by reporting that, look, we have this dossier. If they had just said, hey, they got hacked, they knew that 3 weeks ago and they didn't report that. Right? So it's a very strange, the way that, Ben Smith's reacting to it on one level, totally understandable. We need to be more careful. We need to not make these mistakes, etc. But it's like an incredibly incurious way to approach it. Right? Those are questions I'm asking. I'm not even a fucking journalist. Right? I mean, I know a bunch of journalists, but I'm not a journalist. And I can say, well, wait a minute. We don't have to say anything about what's in the hack. Right. To ask why they didn't go to the FBI. Right? And why did, for instance, Washington Post could have written a story saying, why is Politico sitting on it? Why are they doing that? They've known for weeks. So there's a lot here that's not going on. That irrespective of whether or not you want to be careful about a campaign being hacked, there's a lot going on that's odd.
Speaking of odd, I wanted to just get your comment on, over the past couple of days, there's been some really outrageous, shocking, even for the disgraced former Trump, commentary, reactions, and so on. I just want to throw two of them at you. Number one, he told the story that he was on a helicopter with Willie Brown. He wasn't. He was on with somebody else, another black guy with the last name Brown. It's all been confirmed And Trump is telling Maggie Haberman at the New York Times he's going to sue her for lying about it because he has the manifests. Of course, he will not give them to her because he doesn't, because he's lying. So the fact that he got those two guys completely wrong, I want to get your reaction maybe to the media's reaction and how big of a story that is. And more importantly, to some extent, on Sunday, he posted that the photos from the Harris-Walz rally in Michigan were fake. And many on the right are also running with that. The photos are clearly not fake. There's videos from all the hundreds, if not thousands, of people who were there on their cameras. People are publishing them one after the other. There's no reason to say that. Trump, in his Truth Social post, wrote, these are AI'd. And the reason I illustrate these two examples to you is to say these two are shocking and increasingly detached from a kind of reality that even he has always been detached from. But now it seems to be way off, not on Earth 2, but Earth 3 boil.
Well, I mean, if AI was that good, he'd be using it every day because he desperately needs it.
Yeah, at his rallies or J.D. Vance's gatherings where like 12 people show up.
Exactly. And so I will say this. The story of Trump mistaking one African-American politician for another, when the other is a head taller and much lighter skinned and is a completely different guy doing completely different things that has nothing to do with the other one. I'm amazed that's not a bigger story because as that politician said, I forget his name, but he said, I guess we all look alike to him. And it seems to me like that's a big deal. Like that is a story that I don't care that everybody knows Trump sucks and that he's a bit of a racist and everything else, but this is like definitive proof of it. Right. And it really just is a very strange thing that it's not a bigger story.
Ex-California State Senator Nate Holden says he, not Willie Brown, was on a helicopter that made an emergency landing. The former LA City Council member Nate Holden.
Instead of from San Francisco, a head taller, completely different guy doing different things. I mean, there's no way that a normal person makes this mistake. And I think that should be a bigger story. And I think the press almost has like a callus with Trump now.
Right.
Where they just assume everybody doesn't think this would be a big story to them. And again, it gets it even now when Harris is just rocking and rolling and the Democrats look great and Trump is gurning and losing his mind over what he sees as a campaign that's getting out of his control. And these are stories you could still fit in there. I don't understand why this is hard to do. Like, this is really easy to do. It's a simple story. Like, think about how easily understandable the story is of an older white guy who everyone knows is a racist and quite literally can't tell one black person from another. That seems like the most obvious story in history. And yet, the New York Times barely made the paper and most other media barely got a mention, which is really just astonishing to me. Again, you would think that right now, given how well things are going for the good guys, that I would be a little happier with the way the media is treating things. And I'm no less happy or no more happy than I was before because they're still missing all kinds of things that really are just, call the balls and strikes. That seems like an obvious strikeout for Trump and it's not going on the batting card. So it's just very bizarre to me.
And a little bit more about the accusations that the Harris campaign is, and that these photos and videos are of the attendance are fake. Obviously, it's bothering him so much that there's so much energy and that there's big crowds because he cares so much about it. But I mean, how do journalists handle that with the Trump campaign, with J.D. Vance, if they get the opportunity? Isn't that the only? I mean, sometimes I want to say, isn't that the only question that they should be being asked after Trump makes up these AI'd photos accusations?
So Jonathan Martin, I think it was yesterday, he had an interview with J.D. Vance where he just said, why would you repeat these things that Trump says that are lies? And Vance starts pushing back and starts repeating it. And Martin literally was like, no, you're just completely repeating the lie.
You mean John Carl, ABC John Carl?
I'm sorry, Jonathan Carl. I'm sorry, excuse me.
Yep.
And he basically is like, he overtly says, you're just repeating the lie. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. That's all you have to do. This is not complicated. When Trump says that, the headline should be Trump is saying a delusional, nutty thing about AI. That is not true. That's it. It doesn't need, you're not being an unfair journalist or being biased if you just say that fact. And yet you see New York Times, and I will tell you, Pete, something really fascinating that I'm seeing right now. I know a lot of people who are very conservative, anti-Trumpers, but they're not super anti-Trumpers. They're not going to vote for Trump. Yeah. But Kamala Harris, they certainly won't vote for her either. And they kind of have that level of unease and dislike that's very evident when you talk to them. They are convinced that the press is 1 billion% in the tank for Harris. And they do not think the press helps Trump at all. They think Trump is just attacked by the press. And I was discussing this with a guy who is a very smart, intellectual conservative of the Amy Coney Barrett type, let's say. And, I was saying to him, like, look at how the New York Times took Trump's press briefing from the other day and effectively rewrote everything he said to sound coherent. Right? When Trump was in that presser, he was like, and then the wombats were biting me on the ass, but, obviously Kamala Harris is a communist and and then that got interpreted into Trump critiques Kamala Harris's, attachment to socialism. Right? Like the New York Times, Washington Post, they all do this. They clean his statements up. And that is an enormous advantage for him. Right? It's a huge advantage because with what happens is they clean up his statements, but they're looking for the misstatement from the Democrat, whoever that happens to be. It was happening to Biden all the time, and it's going to happen to Harris before this race is done. And it's fascinating to me how, I think that people, even conservatives who won't vote for Trump, a lot of them just are incapable of seeing, that New York Times headline that, I post them fairly frequently, these absurd headlines. Trump is reframing the race to be discussing about communism. And you're like, what are you talking about? He just ranted some nutty thing.
You're right.
And so I think it's interesting that we're at a place where people on the right and the left both think the media is against them. And I honestly think that's healthy because liberals and moderates spent way too much time sort of assuming that the media was going to be fair. And it gave the MAGA people a big advantage. And I think that's going away because you see the New York Times now actually changing headlines within hours of posting them because they get such intense pushback from people in the center and the middle.
What do you make of the strategy, the swift voting strategy? Same guy, by the way. They went after John Kerry, and it was effective, and now they're going after Tim Walz and his service, and it's effective. But it seems like a pretty bad bet because, of course, you go after Tim Walz's service because he said one wrong word or a couple wrong words, or he talked about what rank he retired at wasn't exactly. It was temporary. It's technical. It's really not. Doesn't look like a bold-faced lie. But listen. Let's say Tim Walz needs to clean up the things that he said or something like that. Whatever people are maybe saying that he should be doing or the campaign should be doing. But why attack Tim Walz when Donald Trump lied to get out of the Vietnam War? And J.D. Vance was also asked about that, by the way. I think Dana Bash asked him. I played that earlier on the show. What do you make of this strategy of trying to go after Tim Walz's service when Donald Trump didn't serve?
On a purely political, practical level, it's not a very good attack because it takes too hard. It's too hard to explain it. Right. You easily. I mean, I saw Jesse Ventura dealt with it the other day and said no, it's complete bullshit. And was like the guy served for 24 years. He by the way, when 9/11 happened, he was at 20 years and he was going to retire then. And then 9/11 happened, and Tim Walz signed up for another 4 years.
Didn't know that. I did not know that.
Yes, which people don't realize. So, this, and by the way, like another thing that's hilarious, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a military guy who said, at E8 or E9, if that guy had gone to Iraq or Afghanistan, he would never have been within 20 miles of a shooting gun.
Right.
That's not what those guys do. They're in the core of the divisional headquarters, making sure the trains run on time. They're not out there kicking in doors in Kandahar. It's just not what they do. So, just the idea that he sort of avoided combat is really ridiculous. And, J.D. Vance, was a fobbit. He was a forward operating base guy who sat there writing press releases. And you know what? I'm glad he went. I honor his service. But I'm sorry, fuck you if you're like questioning someone else's combat record. You have none yourself. So, and by the way, like Vance went in 4 years and out. Walt stayed in there for 24 freaking years, a quarter or more, third of his life probably. So it's just not an attack that's got a lot of legs, and you can tell their hearts are not really in it. I think their problem is they just don't have a lot to go on.
Yeah.
There's no Trump doesn't talk policy, really. Trump lives off of personality. I think I told you that like his campaign is his id.
Right. It's great.
And these guys don't have much to really catch hold of, either Harris or, what's he going to do? Call Harris a slut for having had a sex life before she was married? Like, good luck with that if you're Donald Trump, right?
Well, apparently he calls her a bitch behind the scenes.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, everyone knows he's doing that already. So even that doesn't even have, almost doesn't even have any raison to it, because it's like, of course he does, because everybody knows this is how he treats women. So he's just, and I will say just in a larger sense, I think his campaign's in a lot of trouble. I think that Democrats are going to be ahead, very definitely in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, obviously Minnesota. I think they're going to be ahead, or at least even in North Carolina and ahead in Georgia. And they're going to be ahead in Nevada, and probably ahead actually in Arizona. And not by a point.
Well, they better be, because I want to pivot
leads.
They better be, because I want to pivot to that other issue that I know that you're thinking about. I just talked with Eric Segall about it, which is they better be winning big in all these states, because Republicans are prepared to challenge the result of the election, including Republican electors in several of the Republican-led states that could not confirm the vote. I mean, they could obviously, and that would be, as Eric Segall said, there'd be riots in Atlanta if they did that in Georgia. Yep. But I would join those riots, by the way. If you overturn, that's why I almost didn't blame the January 6th insurrections. If I believed the lie, the big lie, I too would have been pretty pissed off. But of course I didn't, and you shouldn't, and so they're to blame. But in this case, how concerned are you about that, about these states not confirming the results of the election, which is why we've got to win big in every state?
I honestly don't think that the Supreme Court wants the country to break down. I don't think Amy Coney Barrett would do it. I don't think Kavanaugh would do it. Roberts definitely wouldn't do it. I think if it's going to go to the Supreme Court, there's going to be, the Democrats are already preparing for this, by the way, which is not a thing you read about, but they're already setting up people who would immediately be a plaintiff.
But so are Republicans, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, Kemp, for instance, wouldn't be down with this at all. I mean, so you're going to, my hope is actually that they try it, and that we get a very definitive statement of the legality of all of it from the state and federal courts. And then that's it. And this bullshit's done. And I think that it is the kind of thing that I get why people worry about it, but the fact that it's not a surprise to anybody takes a lot of the sting out of it. And, people are going to go to jail for the last time they did it. And, again, this is the American way. A lot of times people need to go to prison a bunch before everyone else figures out they can't do it anymore. And I think that that's going to be the case with this. I'm not super worried about it. And, Dems are good rioters. We'll win. So,
all right. Well, let me ask you then about the other issue I really want to talk with you about, which is this Ukrainian offensive inside Russia has taken, Russia by surprise, apparently, and a lot of other analysts. But here are just 5 headlines, and I'll get your take on the latest there. From the BBC, Moscow promises, quote, tough response to Ukraine's offensive inside Russia. CNN, doing the least obvious thing. Ukraine embarrasses Putin with surprise assault on southern Russia. Zelensky says Russian forces started fire at Russian-controlled nuclear plant in southern Ukraine. Oh, that was not related, but still related. Ukrainian and Russian troops are gearing up for a showdown in western Russia, says NPR. Ukraine is determined to flatten Russia's Kalino air base. Forbes, and finally Financial Times. Russian reinforcements fail to push back Ukrainian incursion. This was pretty shocking and pretty ballsy, it seems like. What is your take on this, and what are they doing? What are they thinking?
So I would not call this an invasion of Russia. This is more of a raid. It's a big raid. What the Ukrainians did, which is fascinating, is that they basically left their least capable troops in Donetsk, where they were getting the crap kicked out of them by the Russians. And they put their very best troops up facing Kursk in the north, where there's just Russian conscripts, 20-year-old kids who have barely been trained on the other side of the line. There's no obvious sort of operational or strategic reason to invade there, which is why the Russians didn't really put a whole lot there to defend it. Of course, the Ukrainians put their best 4 or 5 brigades, 6, maybe 8, maybe 12 brigades in, and these conscripts, Russian conscripts, just got blown off the line. You had guys that were enormously highly trained with 15, in some cases, guys that had been fighting since 2014 in a lot of these really good divisions or brigades in the Ukrainian army, and they were fighting guys who had no idea what they were doing. So they blasted over the line. They're about halfway to Kursk. They're not going to stay there. The point of this whole thing is to force the Russians to pull troops from other places in the line that are in more danger for Ukraine, and to embarrass them, to have Russians in refugee lines, to have obvious examples that regular Russians can see of how their government and their state doesn't really work very well. And so politically on Putin, this is a big hit. This is embarrassing. And by the way, remember, there's a thing in the Russian military where conscripts are not allowed to be used outside of Russia. And Putin has, for the most part, honored that law because it's so politically unpopular. Well, now hundreds of conscripts have been killed and hundreds more have been captured. And Ukraine's going to have conscripts as prisoners. And they're going to, the Russians are going to start seeing zinc boxes show up in Moscow of kids that got killed, 10 miles, short of Kursk, who were never supposed to be in any real danger. So this politically is really bad for the Russians. And they just look flat-footed again. They look incapable again. It's obvious that where they have any sort of parity, the Ukrainians kick the shit out of them. The Ukrainians also pulled off an electronic countermeasure thing where they basically dropped for about 5 days, every single Russian drone. So the Russians now are trying to figure out how they just got really just beaten on planning. For instance, by the way, the Russians' satellites and their drones are looking at every piece of ground in Ukraine every day. Somehow the Ukrainians managed to do this whole thing that the Russians not catching on to, which surprise in this war has always been the hardest thing to do, given how much surveillance there is of the area. So in every way, the Ukrainians yet again showed they're better at this, they're smarter, etc. In the end, the Russians are going to throw people at it and push the Ukrainians either all the way back or most of the way back to Ukraine. But it's a demonstration raid. It hurts the Russians. It makes them look bad. It shows how bad their system is. It shows to Russians how bad it all is. And by the way, it also says to the allies in Europe and the United States, hey, this isn't World War I. We're going to figure out ways to do this. We're going to work on ways to keep going and going and going until the Russians just can't do it anymore. And that's really the big message for the Russians. The Ukrainians aren't done, not by a long shot. And at some point, this war is going to end when someone is just too exhausted to keep going. And what the Ukrainians are showing is if they just get enough support, it's going to be the Russians and not them. So it's an important development. It's not some monster offensive, but it's a demonstration of what the Ukrainians are very well capable of, and that the Russians are really, they're petering out. They're really petering out. And this is an example. And one last thing about it for what's coming is that the commanding general of that Kursk region got fired today, and he was replaced by an FSB general. Putin put the secret services in charge of the military in the Kursk region. That is a thing that in Russian history has a precedent, and it's not a good one. When the Tsar starts putting the Okhrana in charge of military units, or in German history, when Hitler starts giving Himmler charge of the fronts at the end of World War II, it's because they couldn't get shit done the regular way. So they had to go and find the security services to go make things happen. And the security services of any nation, they're not good at this.
Right.
They're bad at it. It's not the way they think. It's not how, they're just not good at it. I'm sure the Ukrainians are ecstatic that they've got some, KGB-ish guy now trying to fight them when, he doesn't know anything about combat. And the Ukrainians are about as finely honed and tuned as you can get right now. So it's a end of the world. It's not this huge thing, but it's another stage in the war that the Russians are, even when they get the territory back, they'll have lost 4-1 in men. They'll have lost tons of equipment. They embarrassed it demonstrates to Russia's allies, the Chinese, that they're not in control of this and they're really only surviving just out of numbers. So it's in the end, it's a pretty good thing.
Anything else that you wanted to comment on or that you've been watching that I didn't ask you about?
No, my only thing that I would say that I've been thinking about a lot is that I'm extraordinarily optimistic about the way things are going.
Great.
But that everybody give money, donate your time, vote early and vote often. Because it ain't over until Donald Trump is down by 4 states at midnight on November 5th.
Thank you very much for that and for talking to me. I really appreciate you as always, my friend.
Cheers, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, there he goes, Bill B in D.C., everybody. Go check him out on Blue Sky and on Twitter and let him know that you heard him here on the show, and that is the show. Thank you very much to Eric Segall. Thank you to John Carroll, who does the music for the show, and thank you for supporting it. Patreon.com is the only way I can do it, and I'm headed out to the swing states. Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania is the plan right now. It looks like I'll also be most likely in Nevada in September as well. I hope to see you there. If you've got a place for me to stay, let me know if you're in any of those states. Looks like I'll have places in all of those states. I could use as many offers as I've got. So if you live in any of those states or know anybody who does, who wants to put me up in their basement, boat, or attic, I'm happy to stay. All I need is 30 inches. I sleep on my side. You guys are the greatest, and I can't do it without you. So go give a review on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. That means a lot. You can upgrade your subscription at any time to help me pay for the tour and everything else that goes into making this show happen. That's it. That's all I've got. John Carroll singing us in and out each and every day. Go buy his stuff. JohnCarroll.org right now. Bumblebees, love you.
Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand